Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are going on an absolutely fascinating journey. Seriously, we're taking a deep, systemic dive into the very anatomy of human society. We're going to weave together ancient Indian statecraft, the literal biological functions of living organisms, and some profoundly deep Islamic spiritual philosophy. I know, it sounds like a wild mix, right? But I promise you, by the end of this explainer, you're going to see exactly how perfectly these pieces fit together to answer one of the biggest questions of all: how do we actually survive and thrive together? And ultimately, we'll see how this delicate balance between state and soul points toward an ultimate divine restoration of justice. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive right into this with a terrifyingly high-stakes concept. This chilling quote is from the Arthashastra, which is an ancient Indian manual on statecraft, and it basically describes the absolute worst-case scenario for humanity: complete statelessness. Without a ruling structure, human society devolves into what they call the law of the fish, basically where the big fish simply eat the little fish. So imagine two neighbors, okay? A weak man named Salem and a much stronger man named Jassa. Without a state, Jassa just completely devours Salem's livelihood. There's literally nothing stopping him. It establishes right away exactly why we put up with rulers, taxes, and laws. Because even for the peasant at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy, living within a structured state is way, way better than being devoured out in the wild. We built societies because we have to survive.
To understand exactly how we escape this law of the fish, here is our roadmap for today. First, the anatomy of governance. Second, the core of human nature. Third, barzakh, the ultimate balance. Fourth, the prophetic embodiment. Fifth, the mechanics of justice. And finally, number 6, our interconnected modern world.
Let's start with part 1, the anatomy of governance.
So how did historical human societies actually avoid being eaten alive? Well, they formed structured states. The historian David Christian offers this absolutely brilliant analogy. A state functions exactly like a living biological organism. Think about it. Just as a cell has a semi-permeable wall to protect its insides, a state has sovereign borders. An organism uses its metabolism to convert sunlight and food into energy, right? Well, a state uses taxation and agriculture to mobilize resources and keep the machinery running. And crucially, just as an organism has a nervous system that uses pain and pleasure to survive, a state maintains a gradient of coercion, rewards, punishments, laws, to keep order. Ancient texts often call this the scepter of punishment, and it's quite literally the foundation of statehood. Without that nervous system, the organism just dies.
Moving on to part 2, the core of human nature.
Understanding the physical machinery of the state is really only half the puzzle, right? We have to look at the humans inside it. In classical Islamic theology, particularly in the framework of the scholar Ibn Taymiyyah, we encounter this incredibly powerful concept called fitra. Basically, humans are not born as blank slates, not at all. Instead, we're born with a living, innate disposition. It's a primordial attunement to recognize truth and cosmic harmony. Think of it as a deep inner readiness. Now, we have the free will to either cultivate this readiness or suppress it, but it is always there, just waiting for a reminder. And this brings us to the growth of human consciousness, or what is known as tazkiyah, essentially self-reform. This internal purification is the actual basis of a healthy society. You can think of it as acting like a pillar of light that holds up the entire state. Our sources outline 4 progressive stages of this development. First up is the psychological stance, where a person transcends their own ego. A really practical tool for this is physical prostration, which literally trains the mind to humble itself and hear the truth. Second is embodying that truth, known as iman, actually gaining knowledge and acting on it. Third is ihsan, which is a state of steadfast certainty and deep, deep understanding. And finally, for a select few across history, the stage of receiving direct divine knowledge to guide humanity. It is quite literally a ladder of awareness.
Which leads us to part 3, barzakh, the ultimate balance.
But how do we actually reconcile the punishing machinery of the state with the human soul? Well, this perfectly illustrates the solution: the concept of barzakh. You see, in philosophy, we often get trapped between 2 extremes. On one hand, you have Western idealism, which is all about pure spirituality and interiority. On the other hand, there's materialism, arguing we are just biological machines reacting to external physical signals. Fitra and the wider theory of barzakh sits perfectly right in the middle. It is a highly interactive state, kind of like the yin-yang. It's a dynamic synthesis that arises from the encounter between our inner spiritual readiness and the external physical world. We aren't purely spiritual monks, and we certainly aren't just gears in a state machine. We are the bridge between the two.
All right, part 4, the prophetic embodiment.
Now, all of this sounds great in theory, but what does optimal Barzakian consciousness actually look like in a real human being? Well, our sources highlight the life of the Prophet Muhammad as the absolute ultimate embodiment of this balance. He embodied this so perfectly that he even laid out a profound political prophecy, the 5 stages of governance humanity would endure, going from prophetic guidance down to oppressive kingship, and then ultimately returning to justice. He wasn't a recluse hiding on a mountain. He was fully engaged in the messy, day-to-day reality of the world. He acted as a judge, managed trade, raised a family, led armies, and navigated super-complex politics. Yet all of this worldly engagement was flawlessly combined with an uninterrupted spiritual presence, deep prayer, receiving revelation, and fostering ethical harmony. There was no monasticism here, but there was also no drowning in pure materialism. It was just the perfect living barzakh.
Let's look at Part 5, Mechanics of Justice. So, if you're managing the immense complexities of society, how do you practically enforce this balance? Well, Islamic jurisprudence views governance as a calculated surgical risk. It operates on one absolute golden rule: no harm nor reciprocating harm. To enforce this, jurists use a sequence of legal tools that act kind of like a fractal shield protecting society. Analogy and equity manage daily issues by extending precedent or departing from strict rules to avoid harm. But the true shield here is blocking means. This is based on the foundational maxim that warding off harm precedes bringing benefit. It literally outlaws perfectly permissible actions if the foreseeable outcome is societal harm. It's all about stopping the damage before it even starts.
Let's look at a concrete, real-world application of this to really make it click. In medicine, a doctor might use analogy to prescribe a drug for a new disease because they share the exact same biological mechanism. Simple enough, right? But what about tech policy? Imagine Justice develops a powerfully advanced new AI application. Using the legal tool of blocking means, the state might completely ban it to protect vulnerable citizens like Salem. And that's not because the code itself is inherently illegal, but because the foreseeable, inevitable outcome of deploying it would cause massive societal harm. Governance uses these tools like a precision scalpel to carefully intervene and protect the whole organism.
And finally, Part 6, our interconnected modern world. Now, let's fast forward directly into our own hyper-complex technological reality. We are entering an era of quantum growth and artificial intelligence. And the concept of barzakh, that critical balancing boundary layer we've been talking about, is no longer just between our soul and our physical body. It's actually now the boundary between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. It represents the spiritual resilience required to navigate a totally digital cosmos.
And we absolutely need this resilience, because the sheer complexity of our modern world is honestly staggering. Unlike ancient peasants who could probably survive on their own if the state collapsed, today we are almost entirely specialized wage earners. We're essentially like individual nerve cells that are completely dependent on the host body. Think about what it takes to build and fly an Airbus 380. It requires millions of humans connected across global supply chains, massive legal networks, and vast electrical grids. If those links break, well, Solomon Shahs are immediately plunged right back into the law of the fish.
Which brings us to our final lingering thought. We've built these leviathan states of unimaginable technological and economic power. But technology alone doesn't create harmony. As our external world grows infinitely more complex, is our internal fitra, our primordial attunement to truth and ethics, strong enough to sustain the fragile balance, the barzakh of modern civilization. Because if we fail, the whole organism risks collapse. Yet Islamic eschatology offers a truly beautiful final beacon of hope for this balance: the eventual descent of Jesus Christ, who represents the ultimate restoration of absolute justice and spiritual harmony on earth. It is a profound endpoint to the human story. Thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer today, and I'll see you next time.